I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been broken.
This is Dove Tusman. You're on Equal Footing. Good afternoon, good evening. We're tackling another difficult subject tonight. I am not in studio, traveling, going to my belated 25th anniversary college reunion. That's fun up in the Boston area. Hope the sound quality is okay. Our wonderful sound engineer, Dimitri, our wonderful producer, Leah, are there for you if you want to participate and send a text, comment, or question, or call in during the course of the show. We'll do our best. Always a little bit more difficult when we're out of studio. Tonight's topic is about the black person and the Jewish person in America. Black and Jew. Shared social struggles in the past, tensions as well. A lot of attention paid to those difficult aspects of the relationship in recent years. But were there always tensions? Is this really more of a relationship of kinship rather than, I wouldn't say adversaries, but a tense relationship? There's a strong argument to be made that there is a very special bond in the American zeitgeist between the black and the Jewish community. But we're going to challenge that thesis. That's kind of the received wisdom. And we're going to challenge that thesis to some degree. I'm really honored to be joined by two veterans of social justice movements, of the civil rights movement, as apropos to the topic tonight. One person from the black community, one person from the Jewish community. But I suspect that our two guests tonight, having known each other for many years and worked together, we'll get into that in a minute, don't really see each other for their ethnic or racial identity, but rather as brothers, sometimes brothers in arms, brothers in cause. And so it's really an honor to have both of them on tonight. I want to start by introducing Reverend Paul Chandler. Reverend Chandler is the Assistant Director of the Jackie Robinson Center for Physical Culture. He's been a community and social activist for decades, a veteran of the civil rights movement going back to the 1960s. He's co-director of Project Cure. We'll get into what that is, C-U-R-E, Project Cure. Reverend Chandler is co-singer as well. Yes, you heard that right, singer in the racial harmony music group Dr. Laz and the Cure. He's an ordained minister. He's the recipient of many more than I would have time to really mention, numerous civic and national awards in community relations and racial harmony. Reverend Chandler and his wife, Gloria, have several children. They live in Far Rockaway, New York. Reverend Chandler, welcome to Equal Footing for the first, and I hope not the last time. Me. All right, and we're having a little bit of audio difficulty. I know I heard you acknowledge the greeting. Hopefully that'll improve. Welcome to the program. I want to introduce your colleague on the program and to some extent in your professional and life endeavors, Dr. David Lazarson. Dr. Lazarson has given me permission in our pregame to call him Dr. Laz, as so many people do, so I'm going to do that. Dr. Laz is an educator in the field of special needs for more than 40 years. He's won 2 Teacher of the Year awards. He was one of the 5 teachers chosen in all of North America to be inducted into the National Teachers Hall of Fame in 2008. I find that just absolutely beautiful. Dr. Laz is featured in the newly released book, American Teacher, Heroes in the Classroom. He's also an author. He's written 5 books, including one that many of you may have heard of, the popular bestseller, Skullcaps and Switchblades, which chronicles his work in an inner-city school in Buffalo, New York, amongst, again, many other publications. Dr. Laz is a world-known conflict resolution specialist. We heard about the racial harmony singing group Cure that both of our guests on tonight are members of. It's been instrumental in helping to bridge the gap between the black and Jewish community, particularly after race riots tore through the Brooklyn community of Crown Heights in the 1990s. Dr. Laz's third book, Sharing Turf, race relations after the Crown Heights riots was actually made into a feature movie by Showtime. The movie, called Crown Heights, featured 3 of his original songs and stars the TV personality Howie Mandel as Dr. Laz. That is a really cool aspect of your bio, Dr. Laz. Dr. Laz has opened with the musical group that both he and Reverend Chandler are members of for Al Green, the Winans, the Manhattans, and performed for the U.S. Congress and during halftime during a Miami Heat game. Dr. Laz, welcome to Equal Footing again for the first and I hope not the last time.
Thank you very much for having me and my colleague, Reverend Chandler, as well. Pleasure to be here.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you guys, since we're all 3 out of studio, to speak up a little bit more than usual on the line, and hopefully our audience can hear us well. Now, if you'll forgive me, I am going to give a super quick and probably wrong primer on Jewish-African-American relations, Jewish-Black relations in the United States, at least let's say, in the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. And this is just my impression, gentlemen. And I want you to correct me where you think I'm wrong and help our audience understand both the context of the past and the reality of the present. So in the early 20th century, you had tensions around there being the Jewish community was kind of amalgamated with the white community. There were Jewish landlords that were sometimes some of the only landlords that would work with the black community and shop owners and so forth, but there were also tensions that came from that. Where you started to see some of the real initial alliances were where you started to see self-conscious identification in the black community with the Jewish community around the idea of emerging from slavery, the concept of exodus in the very more contemporary history in the United States, post-slavery of the black community in the United States, and in the Jewish tradition, the exodus out of Egypt. And you even had black spirituals and slave songs like Go Down Moses, et cetera, that kind of reflected those ties. And then you had a lot of alliance around initial movements. I was fascinated to learn, gentlemen, that in the between 1914 and 1975, every chair of the NAACP was Jewish. You had a lot of black and Jewish collaboration in the initial foundation of a number of different organizations that were advocating for civil rights in both groups, and then starting during World War II and then into the 50s and 60s, many people consider this kind of a golden age of relations in the United States between the Jewish and black communities. You have some of the first recognition of the Holocaust going on and the persecution of Jews under the Third Reich is from the black community. You have recognition on the other side from and support from the American Jewish community and the American Jewish Committee, and the American Jewish Congress around the Supreme Court case of Brown versus Board of Education to integrate schools. And you increasingly have an alliance in the organization that goes into the 1960s, and Rabbi Abraham Heschel marches hand in hand with Martin Luther King in civil rights marches. You have the shocking murder of black activist James Chaney and the Jewish activist Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman in 1964, where there's a really kind of a bonding, a tragic bonding in the letting of blood. And then in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it's almost like a victory march in a certain sense around, between the communities, where President Johnson signs into law banning discrimination based on race, color, religion, or national origin. And I'm going to stop there because thereafter you start to see some degradation, at least in the generally accepted narrative, in the strong ties, the kinship against persecution bilaterally that existed between the groups. And first of all, I want to ask you guys, and let's start with you, Dr. Laz. It was my Cliff Notes version getting us to the 1960s. Does that feel generally right to you? And I want to ask you both that question, and for you to poke holes in my super stylized quick narrative to get us to what starts to happen in the late 1960s.
Okay. Are you able to, excuse me, to hear me okay?
I hear you well.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I would say you did a splendid job with that. I'm glad you took care of that as opposed to me. I'm not that good with, the sort of the historical sequence. But I'm also a product of the 60s and, participated in marches and marched in Washington. And so I think in that sense, Paul and I are kindred spirits. We didn't meet until actually after the Crown Heights riots in 1991. But I really felt like I was meeting my my long lost soul brother. We had so much in common, and it seemed like our hearts and minds from what we have been through and what we have seen in our lives. I think really helped to. It was good old divine providence strikes, and that we met, and that we were able to take, I think, something that is seemingly very negative stuff that was going on, and really try to turn it around. I will say that the Black and Jewish communities have really. We really have so much in common that it is always. I've always been bewildered and disappointed when the two groups seem not as united as we could be and as we should be. We can accomplish so much more when we're working together. I've also always felt there's been this sort of divide and conquer approach when it comes to minorities. In this country, and then therefore both minorities are sort of left on the fringes, as we're kind of pitted against each other. But again, I think that we have been able to come together, and it's not just words, but I feel like we've really have discovered that we have so much more that unites us than divides us.
Now, Reverend Chandler, you heard my super quick exegesis there on Black-Jewish relations, at least up until the 1960s, starting at the beginning of the 20th century. I acknowledge, because I already got one text from a listener who already knows our number, I haven't even given it out yet, that I was glossing over the landlord issues. And it is true that W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, the great author, even Martin Luther King, often made reference to the tensions in urban centers like Chicago and New York and even in the South between Black tenants and Jewish landlords. And there is, I acknowledge that tension existed, but most historians believe that there was a huge, much more cooperation between these groups from a social activism perspective, starting in the early part of the 20th century through to the mid-60s. Reverend Chandler, does that resonate with you? Do you agree? And what in your view happens in the late 60s where tensions really start to come more to the fore between the communities?
Well, first, thank you for having me and having Laz on your show. But I think that I'm not aware of the tension that you're speaking about that happened in the 60s. There was more unity around in the 60s. We worked very closely together. The Jewish community worked very close, even with Dr. King. And I would say in the 60s in Crown Heights, we weren't having what problems, like in terms of the, you're Jewish and I'm Black. One is, one is religion, etc. Anyway, the game that they try to play with us and separate us as a group of people within the same community that have very strong roots historically. So I think there's been a lot of miseducation, the easiest way to define it, what Laz and myself and other people in our community, we started working on ways that we could unite on a higher level, even though we united because we lived in the same communities and particularly in Crown Heights and Williamsburg, et cetera, et cetera. But, I mean, when I was young, where I lived, the big buildings on the block, what we call the apartment buildings, we used to call them the Jewish buildings, because the majority of the people that lived in those buildings, they were Jewish people. So we went to school at the same schools. We all, back in the days, I'm saying in the 50s, we would have religious instruction on Wednesday. The Catholic kids went to their churches, the Protestant and Christian children went to theirs, and the Jewish children went to theirs. And you can look this up. We were let go on Wednesday afternoon for religious instruction. So there was a commonality in there, just in terms of the respect that the Board of Ed or the mayor, et cetera, back in those days, saw the importance of religious instruction, that we would actually all be let out of school and a half a day back in those days. I don't know when they destroyed that or when they stopped it, but it happened. I can't tell you the exact time.
Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit in pardon the interruption, Reverend Chandler. We'll get into that a little bit of the rupture there in the next segment. We're going to take our first break. We're here with Reverend Paul Chandler and Dr. David Lazarson. We're talking about both the history of, and in the next segment, getting more to the current day, of relations between the Black and Jewish communities, areas for repair, where there's been fraying in that relationship that in the past, going back decades, was a very clear social justice alliance. To participate in this discussion, give your point of view, call in. You can do so live by calling 718-303-9090. That's 718-303-9090. You can mention your name, but you don't have to. You can do so anonymously. If you call in, please be patient for Dimitri to pick you up there in the studio. And you can text a comment or question if that's easier. Don't call this number, please. Just text a comment or question by WhatsApp or SMS to 917-428-4062. That's 917-428-4062 to participate in this discussion on Black and Jew in America. We'll be right back. Equal Footing is brought to you in part, I got a little surprise there, the music ended abruptly, by Mechanical Art Capital. Mechanical Art Capital has been a great sponsor of the program for some time. It is for a niche part of our audience, but if you are a watch collector or a watch dealer, you're in the timepiece business, or you love timepieces, you have value on your hands that you can unlock. You can get cash value from your watch collection or your watch inventory by using Mechanical Art Capital's buyback contracts. They're very easy. It's like 2 pages, takes you like 10 minutes to fill out, and you can get your money the next day. So download, if you're a watch dealer or a watch collector, the Mechanical Art Capital app. Those are 3 words separated. You can do so on your iPhone or your Android device. Mechanical Art Capital on your app store. You can also go to mechanicalartcapital.com, or you can call, if you prefer to do it on the phone, by calling 833-209-0972 for more information on getting cash from your collection. You don't have to sell your watches, you're just basically getting financing against them. Very attractive terms, very easy to do. Again, the number is 833-209-0972. 0972, and the company online or in your app store is Mechanical Art Capital.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on check. And I've been broken.
All right, we are back on Equal Footing. Soon we're going to play a little bit of a clip that hopefully we've got geared up. I think if you have been educated in the United States, you've heard this voice and before, and you've heard these particular words before, but they're always impactful. Let's see, Dimitri, if we can run the audio clip.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
All right, that's obviously the iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, a clip from that by the great Martin Luther King Jr. on August 28, 1963, in the March on Washington. It's impossible for me to hear that, as I probably heard it 100 times in my life, and not get chills, even get tears come to my eyes. That was one of the most impactful moments in American history. Now let's give a little context in terms of this show, why we wanted to play that clip. In 1963, when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words, there are several statistical sources to show public opinion at the time in white America, and that at that time these polls would not include Jews, and both of my guests, I'm sure, know at the time you still had signs up in parts of the South that said no Negroes and Jews allowed, and so white America only supported Martin Luther King's movement in the vicinity of 20 to 30%. That number went up over time, but it was a small minority of white America. Historians believe that support in the Jewish community at the time in the United States for Martin Luther King's movement was in excess of 70%. That's an extraordinary difference. There were several rabbinical organizations at the time that were some of the first religious organizations outside of black churches that supported in almost unanimity the Martin Luther King's version of the civil rights struggle. Now, I want to introduce a little bit of a kind of troubling, where the waters start to get troubled. And this is where Reverend Chandler and Dr. Laz, it seemed like both of you probably have a more rose-colored view of this, and that's wonderful. You continue to work to this day and through this whole period. But there is significant social and political history that shows that in the late 60s, a couple things happened that are kind of canaries in the coal mine around problems later that, perhaps reached their apogee in the Crown Heights riots that both of you are very familiar with. It started in the late 1960s. One is you have the movement, the Black Power movement that sits alongside Martin Luther King's nonviolent movement, begins through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and others, Malcolm X and so forth, begin to be more exclusionary, around Jewish colleagues in the movement, and frankly are more criticized by the Jewish community, seen as more threatening. This coincides with also some, there are race riots in a number of northern cities where there are a number of Jewish businesses that are destroyed in that period. And then some historians believe the most important thing, and I would argue, and I want to ask you today, going past the Crown Heights riots and to the moment, the zeitgeist of the Black Power movement, Black Lives Matter, et cetera. This is what may be the most important thing, is that you start to have victories by the state of Israel over its neighboring Arab enemies in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and you begin to have an identification, whether right or wrong, between black social activists and the Palestinian community, where maybe not proactively from the Palestinian side, but you have black social activists see in the Palestinian situation something that feels reminiscent of the oppression that the black community is living in the United States. So I'm positing that, and I promise to talk less for the rest of the program. I'm positing that there you have the beginnings of a crack in the edifice, and that again has its perhaps, hopefully, it's denouement, its worst point in the Crown Heights riots, but we're living with even today. I want to go to each of you on this, and feel free to shoot me down, or if you feel that there's some truth there, address it, and where do we go from there? So, Dr. Laz, what do you think about that thesis? Dr. Laz, you there?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to unmute. Yeah, I think there's, an element of validity to that, because also, we have to remember that these are, we're talking minority groups who feel disenfranchised and feel, on the fringes. And so you also had, while this was going on, you also had, the rise of the JDL movement, who many in the Jewish community were, saw that as, going overboard and not exactly, quote unquote, it wasn't the Jewish way, to do things, but it's this idea of, minorities, I think, were embracing this notion of, well, if we don't get protection from without, then we're going to make sure we have protection from within. And so I think, that's a valid point, and I think it, was probably something that was necessary for the times. I have always, again, not meaning to whitewash that, in what differences may have arisen and perhaps are relevant to this, day. I think there was an element of the Jewish community, by and large, identifying with the dominant white culture, which time and time again we have been shown that we're not really, quote unquote, white enough. We certainly weren't white enough. We would have thought we learned that lesson in Nazi Germany. We certainly weren't white enough for that movement. So, I think that this notion of militancy was really, is based a lot on the idea of, well, we just simply have to protect ourselves. And so I feel like, there's certainly elements of that exist to this day. The problem is, in my opinion, is that where we can and should unite, we need more efforts in those areas, and that's something I think that Paul and I have seen play out. The media portrayed the black and Jewish communities in Crown Heights as being enemies, and I remember there was even a headline on the front page of one of the papers, as the riots were sort of still going on, and it had a white handshake with a Jewish star and a black, fist, both in fists going against each other, not in fist pump style, but in, obviously in an antagonistic way. And the headline simply wasn't bold black letters, enemies with a question mark. So to a certain degree, we've bought into that, and we're sort of victimized by this, what I referred to before as this sort of culture at large that very often puts one against the other when it comes to minorities. And because I think that the only way really for us to make positive social change and growth is by coming together and working together. And so we, in terms of what we saw in Crown Heights play out, and I think it's very valid for what's going on in the world today, we had no agenda when I met with Paul and also with Richard Green, a community activist who runs the Crown Heights Youth Collective, and also African American. We had no agenda other than to bring our youth together. And it was a real eye-opening experience, because I think the thing that came across from our very first meeting was, despite the fact of living in the same community physically, we knew so very little about each other. And so I think when that is part of the dynamic, then it's very easy to be afraid of the other side, to be ignorant of the other side, and to demonize the other side. So I'll stop there, because I'd like to Paul stop on that.
And the work that you, Dr. Laz, and you, Reverend Paul Chandler, did in the context of the Crown Heights riots and the aftermath is extraordinary, probably meriting its own show. Reverend Chandler, I was obliquely referring to, I didn't say it explicitly, but I was kind of referring to black anti-Semitism that really starts through Louis Farrakhan and his ilk. You start to really see that more, at least prominently on the public social activist stage in the mid 1960s. Do you think today that black anti-Semitism is an issue, and is it related, as I was kind of positing, to an identification with the Palestinian plight in Israel? Does it go back to landlord-tenant relations? What, or am I talking about yesterday's news? It's not an issue now.
Well, I think that the issue comes from a lot of misinformation. I think a lot of it comes from a lot of propaganda and stuff to keep us separated. I think that I was invited to a World Youth Festival. It had to be in I think it was 70. It was like maybe 71 and 72. And going to that festival, it was a World Youth Festival. So that means there were youth from all over the world, from Israel to Vietnam to West Africa to South Africa, etc. The amazing thing was we had an opportunity to also, while we were there, to discuss things like this, but we also had an opportunity to reflect on history, whereas we were given the chance to go to the concentration camps and to go into that. I don't even have the right word to really describe it, but it was like going into hell. Now, I could relate to it when I also took my children and my students down south to the Underground Railroad and other things that they could see as it related to how black people were treated during a period of time. And I say this is that there's been a lot of miseducation, and it has destroyed what God has put into all of us. One is that we were made in God's image. And if his image is what I believe it is to love thy neighbor as you love thyself, then I think that a number of the things that we've seen that happen, it was really promoted by people that only cared about themselves, and it was very profitable. Slavery was very profitable. What Hitler did in Germany was very profitable to those who were invested in making more money. So it boils down to, one is knowing who you are. Now, that's one of the greatest parts of our union coming together, Laz and I. It was a lesson for he and I also, as well as the children, because they got to know each other. They got to understand that, hey, we had more in common than we had not, because we were able to see, and it wasn't about we all played basketball, we played football, or we did double dutch, or we played skelly, but we all have a right hand and a left hand. We all have two eyes. There's no one walking around here with one eye and one. So the point that I'm trying to make is that one God created us all. And I'm not trying to give a sermon here, but we have more in common than we actually have been taught historically. Why is
Reverend Chandler, we're going to need to take another break, but that message of commonality, I think is well captured.
The mic. I'm sorry.
Sorry, say it again.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
I'm just going to, you brought to mind a Martin Luther King quote, which I was able to pull up. He said, "My people were brought to America in chains." This was a talk that he gave to a Jewish group. "My people were brought to America in chains. Your people were driven here to escape the chains fashioned for them in Europe. Our unity is born of our common struggle for centuries, not only to rid ourselves of bondage, but to make oppression of any people by others an impossibility." We're going to take our next break. We're here with Dr. David Lazarson, with Reverend Paul Chandler. They are partners in social activism and in music around racial harmony. They work together on the Crown Heights riots aftermath and bringing youth together and understanding. The next segment, we're going to talk about the reality today. We'll be right back on Equal Footing.
Simple angel, sweet soul from above, singing, oh angel, with love.
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You could even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been told.
You're back on Equal Footing. I'm Dove Tusman. I'm joined by Reverend Paul Chandler and Dr. David Lazarson. We're talking about Black and Jewish relations in America. We've gotten some good questions and comments on text, which we're going to get to. If we've got a caller on the line, which I'm out of studio, so it's a little bit difficult. Dimitri, if we have a caller on the line, you can put him or her through.
No.
Okay, they may have hung up. All right. So let's get to a couple of questions here, because I do want to bring out the existing tensions, gentlemen, that exist in the communities, because we've got a number of listeners' questions on this already. There was an Anti-Defamation League conference in New York. I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, but I read press about these protests that were occurring outside. Black Lives Matters groups were hand in hand with Palestinian demonstrators protesting. This is something new between the groups. Although, of course, the Crown Heights riots were about racial conflagration in this sense. But here, it's something I think philosophical, and we've got a couple of audience members who have asked specifically about this connection between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Palestinian cause. And Reverend Chandler, what's that about? Is this something that is, because we may be moshing together a whole group's, perspective, but when you deal with black youth, do you feel that there is kind of a systemic identification with the Palestinian cause, and a kind of aversion to the Zionist perspective or the state of Israel more broadly?
I don't think there's a systemic situation there. I think that's, again, there are a lot of misinformation, even in terms of our history as a people. I'm not talking about a religion. I'm talking about as a people. Lads, you recall when we took the flight. Could you tell them about the flight that we took with all the children from the Hasidic community, from Crown Heights? Okay, and that was black and white, Jews and Christians, et cetera, et cetera. We took them on a flight. Laz?
Yes. Can you able to hear me? Because I just didn't want to unmute, to disturb.
We hear you, Dr. Laz.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. Yeah. So what?
I'd like you to on the flight, why we did that flight, and why we felt that flight was so important.
Right. That was the anniversary. I think it was maybe called Operation Solomon, the one where they rescued the Ethiopian Jewish community. And so it was on an El Al flight, and we brought in youth from the Hasidic community and also from the black community, the Caribbean American community, and we all were treated to a flight that basically went around New York City, the tri-state area. It was the same pilot who flew into Ethiopia on that rescue mission. And, it was an eye-opener because there everybody got to see here were Jews who were, dark-skinned, and a lot of people were not aware of that. I would say even from both communities, other than perhaps a few converts in the Crown Heights community. But it was an exciting flight, very educational for everyone involved. I know that's the flight that Paul is referring to. So, I think it's when you mention like some of the issues today, I think there tends to be, and there tends to be this on college campuses where they see, they're sort of rooting for the underdog, which is a noble cause, but it's just misguided because, like Paul said, it's based on a lot of misinformation. I teach on a couple different college campuses in the education field, and so there's been lots of discussions that I've been involved with, and and people will come up to me and say, well, Israel, the different tropes that they throw around about Israel, which are simply, it's not just simplistic, but they're not even true. And, one is Israel is an apartheid country. And it's probably the exact opposite. It's probably the most inclusive country. And I would venture to say more inclusive than our own country of the good old USA. You have in the Israeli Knesset, you have Arabs, you have Muslims who are representing their communities, and you have Muslim and Arab judges, and you have the Arab populations who, work in all different sectors of Israel's society. But yet that is a very common negative stereotype that's thrown out there. That again it's just misinformation. Now, whether some of it is deliberate or not is a whole separate issue. But the important thing is that has to be fought with knowledge, and that has to be fought with, when those things come up, then, there needs to be the voices for truth and reason have to be heard. We can't let the squeaky wheels get the grease just because they're loud, and the protests might be loud, and that might not be our derech, and that might not be our way.
Well, Dr. Laz, you mentioned that on this flight that there were Hasidic kids, and the reaction to some of the black kids seeing dark-skinned Jews in Israel. Very interesting visuals. You just talked about the derech, like what's our way. I want to read a comment from a listener named Mark that deserves to be read word for word. The Jewish religion argues for social justice. We sometimes call it tikkun olam. The Reform movement is involved with all of that. The problem is, if one's adherence to Judaism informs social justice, one would expect the Orthodox community, those for whom traditional Judaism is most present in their everyday life, to be the lead in racial equality and brotherhood, I guess that should be, with the black community. In fact, it's the opposite. The more religiously traditional, the less engaged Jews are in social justice. I thought that was the best phrased comment. We had we have three other comments along these lines that I'm inappropriately talking about the community as a whole here, and that the more frum, the more Orthodox observant end of the community is, which I know you're a member of to some degree, Dr. Laz, I think that's correct, is not engaged in social justice and is not inclined to seek kinship in black social activism. I want your reactions, Dr. Laz, to that from the Jewish perspective, and Reverend Chandler, I'd like your perspective on that as well.
Okay. All I can say is that that I think is changing, and I think it's changing in very significant ways. I think to a certain degree that is correct, but what I've seen over the past 30 plus years is that there's been tremendous growth and improvement in that. You have now, within, just speaking again from the Crown Heights community where I lived for 13 years, and visit quite a bit. We started off, we were probably the only organization that worked together, that we were bringing together blacks and Jews from the community. And now you have, since then, there's several women's groups that are doing that. Now you're talking, this is from the, Hasidic community. And there's other community outreach groups that are doing that. And, you had, I think when the Black Lives Matter demonstrations were going on, kind of in the height, there were several Jewish organizations actually from Crown Heights that marched together in these BLM marches in Brooklyn and in New York City. So I think you're getting a lot more of there's a lot more going on than, you can't paint this picture with these broad strokes of saying, we're doing a lot and you guys are not.
Reverend Chandler, sorry for the interruption, Dr. Laz.
Yeah.
Reverend Chandler, before we go to our last break, do you agree with this listener that the more Orthodox members of the Jewish community are less apt to feel kinship with black causes of social justice? Reverend Chandler, are you there? Okay, we'll shelve that. We may need to get him back on the line. We'll go to our last break. We'll be right back.
Can I add one thing, Duff?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was very interesting when you talk about leadership. So before Project Cure started, which I met with Richard and Paul, and I was maybe 2 weeks after the riot. So the community was very hot. There was a lot of tension. It looked like a war zone. There were police and helicopters flying overhead, cops in riot gear on all four corners of an intersection, police in taped up vans going back and forth, police snipers on rooftops. The community looked like a war zone. And the Mayor Dinkins, who is African American and was mayor back then, so he came to visit Crown Heights and to meet with the Rebbe. Now, I've actually been privy to see the footage of this, and he said to the Rebbe something to this effect. It's not verbatim, but this is the gist of the idea. He said to the Rebbe, "I'm the leader of my community. You're the leader of your community. Let's work together to bring peace to both communities." And you actually saw people like nodding their head. The Rebbe's office was packed to the gills, with the Rebbe's sort of closest Hasidim, and the mayor's entourage and people from the media. And the Rebbe, without batting an eye, he said to the mayor, and this became sort of our motto, he said to the mayor, he said, "Mr. Mayor, we're not two communities. We're one community under one administration, under one God." So you talk about somebody who this is, as religious as you can get, a Hasidic master and leader, but a true visionary. He, saw it from a deeper perspective, and not a political perspective. And I think what Paul was referring to before, seeing that everyone is indeed created in the image of, godliness. We have, we're all important in the scheme of life. And so that was the Rebbe's reality. And I feel like when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, the Rebbe is like so much cooler than me, like so much hipper than most people on the planet, because all the people in the Rebbe's office, you're talking Jewish, Gentile, blacks, whites, everybody nodded their heads after the mayor's statement because, I thought that was true. But the Rebbe's vision was much broader than that. And so, and not something that's just saying words, but I think that's a reality that we need to push. We need to get out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to do the show tonight, is for people that don't know that past with Rebbe Menachem Schneerson, who was the late and blessed leader of the Chabad Lubavitcher movement that you're talking about. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, many other prominent in the United States, and their role in supporting the civil rights movement in the 1960s, 70s, beyond. So it's important for us to understand that history. I'm going to make a judgment call, just given where we are in the hour, not to go to our last ad break, which Dr. Laz and Reverend Chandler, that means we're not going to get to hear another one of your wonderful songs that we've been using from Dr. Laz and the Cure on these ad breaks. And I'm sure one of our sponsors will be upset by it. But I do want to get to a couple more listener questions, because as often happens late in the game, things get really engaging. So there's a quote here, and Reverend Chandler, I think we have you back on the line. And this is a listener that that I'm going to leave unnamed. But he says, if I ever go to a Seder, this is a black listener, says, if I ever go to a Seder and the Jews say that they know what it's like because, quote unquote, they too were once slaves in Egypt, I'm going to punch them. And I think, and there's more there to that comment, but I think the gist of it is that one slavery and Exodus narrative is thousands of years old, although we do feel it very much, and the Holocaust is just a couple generations in the past. But the slavery narrative in the United States is much more recent. That direct slavery narrative, not a narrative, that slavery reality. And I think, and Reverend Chandler, I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth. It seems to be, from this comment and others, that there's some frustration that the ADL and the AJC and other organizations don't seem to be as behind things like taking down Confederate, general statues, or rewriting and rethinking the narrative of the teaching of slavery in public schools, these kinds of things. It seems like there isn't as much support that should be there. Do you agree with that frustration?
Are you asking me, do I agree with the frustration that people don't want to get involved in identifying these situations that have existed for years? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, particularly from the Jewish community, from the Anti-Defamation League, American Jewish Congress, and other organizations that at least haven't been perceived to be as strongly supportive of some of those causes.
And I kind of understand it based on also the environment that we're in now. I mean, we just came out of a crisis politically in this country, and I'm not going to name any names, but we just came out of a crisis. And there was a saying some years ago, today it's going to be this group, the next day and the next day they're coming after you. So that game, it's still going on. And people are falling for it. The attack today may be on, the black community, but trust me, it's going to get bigger than that if we allow it to keep going. So that's why there's a lot in the fact what the Rebbe said to us is that we have more, how do you say that, Laz? Laz?
I think that Dr. Laz actually quoted that in while you were off the line, the Rebbe's comments.
Okay.
I need to cut us a little bit short here, gentlemen, because we're about to come up on the hour. To your last, in response to this last listener's comment, I got a real-time comment from another listener who says these connections between the impressions and the feelings of slavery are very real, despite the differences in time, and reminds us that the book Uncle Tom's Cabin was translated to Yiddish and Hebrew before any other languages outside of English. I don't know if that's true. I did see in our pregame that it was translated to Yiddish and Hebrew. I don't know if those were the first or not. So before we break, gentlemen, and we'll have to do a series to do more on this, can you each give 30 to 60 seconds, please no more, on what you would tell listeners to this show from your respective communities? I know we're all one community, but from the Jewish world, from the black community, just some words of wisdom on the kinship here, the bond that exists. Dr. Laz, you first, and Reverend Chandler, you'll finish us off.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Put me on the spot here, huh? Words of wisdom. Okay. Well, I could just speak from the heart and, say that I feel like that people think that we have to do these major, huge undertakings, to change the world, right? And I think really it's got to be much more personal than that.
Amen. I'm going to need to cut you off there because we're going to run out of time. Reverend Chandler, you finish us off here, last 2 seconds.
I would just say this here. Working together is the way to be. That's how we survive through history. So do the what, lad?
Do the mitzvahs because it's lots of fun.
And
peace will reign.
Amen. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being on Equal Footing. We will catch you next time.
And the world would be one. Okay.